Early in the pandemic, as people isolated and ICUs filled with patients, from Washington to Moscow, a connection that even today is making news. Then President Donald Trump agreed to send Russian President Vladimir Putin COVID test machines, the Kremlin told NBC News and other news organizations this week. Its spokesman saying in part, in the beginning, all the countries tried to swap some aid. We sent artificial lung ventilators to the States. The Americans sent us several samples of those testing systems. At the time, there were very few of them. Many countries did this. The story was first reported in War, a new book by the veteran Washington reporter Bob Woodward, and immediately became part of the election.
In the height of the pandemic,
Vice President Kamala Harris discussing it during an interview with radio host Howard Stern.
Everybody was scrambling to get these kits, the tests, the COVID test kits.
Couldn't get them.
Couldn't get them.
Right.
Couldn't get them anywhere.
Right.
And this guy who is president of the United States is sending them to Russia, to a murderous dictator for his personal use?
The Kremlin denying unconfirmed reports from Woodward's book that former President Trump stayed in contact with Putin after he left office, saying, as for any calls which allegedly took place after Trump ceased to be the president, this is not true. This did not happen. Trump and his campaign have denied the reporting in Woodward's book as well. In recent weeks, Trump has taken meetings with a number of world leaders, including the President of the UAE, the British Prime Minister, and Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky, using that opportunity to tout his ties to Putin.
So we have a very good relationship. And I also have a very good relationship, as you know, with President Putin. It's an honor to be with you.
The relationship between Trump and Putin has become the focus of global fascination. Summits between the two men, while Trump was president, and the long press conferences together left many world leaders stunned. Then, as COVID struck, Russia's efforts to protect President Putin led to photo ops like this one. The leader sitting at the end of a long table, a form of social distancing from French President Emmanuel Macron. At times, Putin fully isolating and delivering solo video conferences. His distance from his own advisors left him dependent on a smaller group, creating the conditions for his decision to fully invade Ukraine, Western intelligence officials say. When NBC News interviewed Putin before the invasion, after President Joe Biden was in office, the Russian leader compared Trump and Biden.
I believe that former U.S. President Mr. Trump is an extraordinary individual, talented individual. Otherwise, he would not have become a U.S. president. President Biden, of course, is radically different from Trump because President Biden is a career man. He has spent virtually his entire adulthood in politics.
In July, a U.S. intelligence official indicated that Russia prefers Trump to win the presidential election. Now, the Trump administration's decision to send COVID tests is under the microscope. Was it understandable diplomacy or pandering to an autocrat?
And Keir Simmons joins us now. Keir, we saw a clip from your interview with Putin back during the pandemic in your piece. So talk to us about the protocols they had in place at that time and the concerns he had surrounding COVID.
Well, Alison, there's no question that the Kremlin was deeply concerned about COVID and President Putin. I know that myself because before that interview, I had to quarantine for 2 weeks, locked on my own in a hotel room, handed food by FSB officers, that's the former KGB, in white overalls. And then when we went to the Kremlin for that interview, we had to go through a disinfectant system in order to simply sit down and speak to the Russian president. We all saw the pictures, but it's easy to forget just how worried Russian officials were that President Putin might catch COVID. That, of course, is because he is so important to Russia. He is an autocrat. Without him, many of those officials would be lost, frankly.
And Keir, it's not unusual for leaders to remain in contact after their terms have passed, but in this case, the United States and Russia, they really have not been allies for quite some time, even if they say, the pair say they haven't spoken recently. Is there a level of concern when you speak to sources about the relationship between Trump and Putin today?
Well, look, there will be concerns, won't there? And it is something to do with who President Putin is for many people. Relationships between leaders after they've left office are famous. There was Thatcher and Reagan, Blair and Clinton, Blair and Bush. But that feels different, doesn't it, to someone like President Putin? I think one of the issues here is that we simply don't know what was said in some of the meetings between President Trump when he was president and President Putin in Helsinki in 2017 and Osaka in 2019, when President Trump famously told reporters, "It's none of your business." So for there to be conversations, if there were, and we have to just say again that both President Trump and the Kremlin say that there have not been. But if there were, then there are going to be people who are going to say, well, what we're worried about here isn't necessarily the contact. Maybe that happens all the time with all kinds of leaders. The question is, what was said?
Here's